Before we dive into one of the most shocking criminal dynasties in American history, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Because what you're about to hear, a century of power, corruption, and murder, is going to leave you speechless. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Part 1. The night everything collapsed. June 7th, 2021. Colleton County, South Carolina. At 10:06 p.m., a frantic 911 call comes through. The caller's voice is shaking, breathless, almost incomprehensible. "My wife and son have been shot badly. Please come quick." The caller is Alex Murdaugh, a prominent personal injury lawyer from one of South Carolina's most powerful legal families. When deputies arrive at the family's sprawling hunting estate, Moselle, 1,700 acres of isolated low-country property, they find a scene that will haunt them forever. Near the dog kennels, lying in pools of blood under the South Carolina moon, are two bodies. 52-year-old Maggie Murdaugh, Alex's wife, shot multiple times with a rifle, and 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh, their youngest son, his head and chest obliterated by two shotgun blasts at close range. The violence is extreme, personal, rage-fueled. Alex Murdaugh stands near the bodies, appearing distraught, covered in his son's blood. He tells investigators he'd been visiting his ailing mother at her home nearby, that he'd returned to Moselle around 10 p.m. and discovered the carnage. He immediately becomes the grieving husband and father, the sympathetic victim of an unimaginable tragedy. But here's what investigators don't know yet. What nobody outside the family knows is that the Murdaugh family has been hemorrhaging secrets for years. And this night, this double murder on their ancestral hunting grounds is about to unravel a dynasty built on a century of power, privilege, and corruption. To understand what happened on June 7th, you need to understand who the Murdaughs were in South Carolina. For nearly 100 years, the Murdaugh name meant one thing in the state's lowcountry: untouchable power. Alex's great-grandfather, Randolph Murdaugh Sr., founded a law firm in 1910 that would become a legal empire. But more importantly, in 1920, he became the solicitor for South Carolina's 14th Judicial Circuit, essentially the chief prosecutor for 5 counties. When he retired, his son, Randolph Jr., took over. When Randolph Jr. retired, his son, Randolph III, Alex's father, took over. 3 generations, 87 years of unbroken prosecutorial control over the same region. Think about that. For nearly a century, if you committed a crime in Hampton County, Colleton County, Allendale County, Beaufort County, or Jasper County, a Murdaugh decided whether to prosecute you, what charges to file, what deals to offer. They controlled justice itself. And the law firm, Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Eltsroth, and Dietrich, known as PMPD, grew into a personal injury practice. The Murdaughs specialized in devastating injury cases: car accidents, workplace disasters, wrongful deaths. They'd represent victims against big corporations and insurance companies, often winning multi-million-dollar settlements. Alex Murdaugh, carrying on the family tradition, was known as a charismatic, aggressive litigator who could charm juries and intimidate opponents. The family lived like Southern royalty. Multiple properties, including the Moselle hunting estate, membership in exclusive clubs, deep political connections. They donated hundreds of thousands to local and state politicians over decades. In Hampton County, population 12,000, the Murdaughs weren't just influential. They were the law. But behind the carefully maintained facade of legal prestige and community service, something had gone terribly wrong. And it started, in many ways, with Paul Murdaugh. February 24, 2019. A cold winter night. 6 teenagers, college students home for the weekend, decide to go out on the Murdaugh family's boat, a center console fishing vessel. They've been drinking. Paul Murdaugh, then 19, is at the helm. He's drunk, belligerent, driving the boat recklessly through the dark waters near Paris Island. Around 2:20 a.m., with Paul ignoring his friends' pleas to slow down, the boat slams into the piling of a bridge at 40 miles per hour. The impact is catastrophic. Teenagers are thrown into the freezing water. Bones break. Screams echo across the marsh. When everyone is accounted for, one person is missing: Mallory Beach, 19 years old, beautiful, with her whole life ahead of her. For a week, search teams combed the waterways. Then, on March 3rd, A week after the crash, Mallory's body is found miles downstream, washed up on a marsh bank. The investigation into the boat crash begins. And almost immediately, something strange happens. Witnesses report that at the hospital, after the crash, Alex Murdaugh and his older son, Buster, arrived and seemed more concerned with controlling the narrative than with the injured teenagers. Multiple witnesses said they heard the Murdaughs telling the teenagers not to talk to police, to say they didn't know who was driving. Paul Murdaugh is eventually charged with 3 felonies: boating under the influence causing death and 2 counts of BUI, causing great bodily injury. But he's released on bond. And the Murdaugh machinery kicks into gear. Lawyers, investigators, political connections, all working to minimize the damage to the family name. Mallory Beach's family files a wrongful death lawsuit against Alex Murdaugh and Buster, alleging they provided Paul with alcohol knowing he had a problem, that they'd enabled his reckless behavior. The lawsuit seeks to pierce through the family's assets, to hold them accountable. But Paul Murdaugh will never face trial for Mallory's death, because on June 7, 2021, someone executes him at the family kennels with a shotgun. The question that immediately consumes investigators: who wanted the Murdaughs dead? The obvious answer: Mallory Beach's family and friends had motive. Paul had killed a beloved young woman and seemed destined to escape serious consequences because of his family's power. But detectives quickly clear them. They have alibis. And the Beach family, while devastated and angry, doesn't fit the profile for this kind of execution-style violence. So who else? The Murdaughs, with their century of prosecuting criminals and bankrupting corporations, had accumulated enemies. Defendants who'd gone to prison, families who'd lost everything in lawsuits, criminals who blamed their convictions on Murdaugh prosecutions. The list was long. But as investigators dig deeper into the Murdaugh family's recent history, they start finding things that don't add up. Strange deaths, suspicious accidents, financial irregularities. And the more they uncover, the more they realize that the Murdaugh family, this pillar of legal respectability, has been hiding something dark for years. In 2015, 6 years before Paul and Maggie's murders, a 19-year-old named Stephen Smith was found dead in the middle of a rural road in Hampton County. His death was ruled a hit and run, but the evidence never quite fit. No debris from a vehicle, injuries inconsistent with being struck by a car. Witnesses who claimed they'd seen Stephen at a party with Buster Murdaugh the night he died. Stephen's mother, Sandy Smith, spent years insisting her son had been murdered, that his death had been covered up because of Murdaugh involvement. Law enforcement dismissed her claims. The case went cold until June 2021, when investigators start looking at everything connected to the Murdaughs with fresh, suspicious eyes. Then there's Gloria Satterfield. For more than 20 years, Gloria worked as the Murdaugh family housekeeper. She was considered part of the family, trusted, beloved by Maggie and the boys. In February 2018, Gloria died after what Alex Murdaugh described as a tragic accident. She tripped over the family dogs on the front steps of their home, fallen, hit her head, and never recovered. It was ruled an accidental death. No autopsy was performed. Gloria's family, devastated but trusting the Murdaughs, accepted this explanation. But here's where it gets sinister. After Gloria's death, Alex Murdaugh approached her sons and offered to help them file a wrongful death lawsuit against himself and his homeowner's insurance. He'd refer them to a lawyer, his friend, of course, and they'd sue him for Gloria's death. The insurance would pay out, Alex said, and Gloria's sons would get compensation for their mother's death. Gloria's sons, grieving and unfamiliar with legal processes, agreed. They trusted Alex. He'd been their mother's employer for decades. A lawsuit was filed. The insurance company settled for over $4 million. And Gloria Satterfield's sons waited for their money. And waited. And waited. Months passed. Then years. They called the lawyer Alex had recommended. They left messages. No response. What they didn't know, what they wouldn't discover until 2021, 3 years after their mother's death, was that Alex Murdaugh had allegedly stolen every penny of that settlement. The $4 million that was supposed to compensate 2 sons for their mother's death had vanished into Alex Murdaugh's accounts. Gloria's sons received nothing. Zero. They didn't even know a settlement had been reached. By June 2021, the walls were closing in on Alex Murdaugh. The boat crash lawsuit was proceeding, threatening to expose the family's finances. There were whispers that his law firm was auditing accounts, that money was missing. The carefully constructed Murdaugh empire was beginning to crack. And then, on that June night, someone killed Maggie and Paul at the dog kennels. 2 shots from a shotgun, multiple shots from a rifle. Extreme violence, personal rage. And Alex, the grieving husband and father, became the center of a media storm that would soon reveal he was far more than a victim. Because as investigators processed the murder scene at Moselle, as they interviewed Alex Murdaugh multiple times, as they built a timeline of that night, they began to notice inconsistencies. Small things at first. Alex's timeline didn't quite match phone records. His story about where he'd been changed slightly between tellings. And there was something about his demeanor, something performed, theatrical, not quite authentic. But the real breakthrough came from technology. From the phones of the dead. Paul Murdaugh had been filming a video at the kennels at 8:44 p.m., just minutes before he was killed. In that video, in the background, you can hear voices. One of those voices, forensic audio experts would later testify, belonged to Alex Murdaugh. He was at the kennels with Paul and Maggie shortly before they died. But Alex had told investigators he hadn't been at the kennels that evening, that he'd been at the main house, that he'd last seen Maggie and Paul hours earlier. He'd lied, and that lie would become the thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything. Part 2. The Web of Lies. By September 2021, 3 months after the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, Alex Murdaugh's life was in freefall. His law firm, PMPD, had confronted him about missing money, millions of dollars that couldn't be accounted for. Alex had been forced to resign. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED, was investigating him for financial crimes. The pressure was unbearable. And then, on September 4th, 2021, something bizarre happened that would make national headlines and further expose the depth of Alex Murdaugh's desperation. Alex called 911 again. He'd been shot, he said. He was on a rural road, changing a tire, when someone pulled up and shot him in the head. He survived, somehow, with what appeared to be a superficial head wound. He was hospitalized, treated, and released. It seemed like another tragedy striking the cursed Murdaugh family. First his wife and son murdered. Now someone had tried to kill him. The family's supporters rallied. Who was targeting the Murdaughs? Was there a killer out there eliminating them one by one? But within days, the story collapsed. Because Alex Murdaugh confessed, through his lawyers, that he'd staged the entire thing. There had been no random shooter. Alex had arranged his own shooting. He'd hired a former client, a man named Curtis Eddie Smith, to kill him on that roadside so his surviving son, Buster, could collect a $10 million life insurance payout. Except Eddie Smith apparently couldn't go through with it. He'd either grazed Alex's head intentionally or Alex had somehow survived a legitimate attempt. Either way, the murder attempt had been a fraud, a desperate scheme by a desperate man whose world was imploding. Alex Murdaugh was charged with insurance fraud and conspiracy. Eddie Smith was arrested. And public opinion, which had been somewhat sympathetic to Alex as a grieving victim, turned venomous. What kind of man stages his own murder? What kind of father tries to die so his son can collect insurance money? And most troubling, if Alex could fake his own shooting, could he have killed his wife and son? The SLED investigation intensified. Detectives obtained warrants for Alex's financial records, phone data, GPS information. They interviewed his associates, his clients, his friends. And what they uncovered was staggering in its scope and depravity. Alex Murdaugh, it turned out, had been stealing from his clients for years, perhaps decades. He'd specialized in devastating injury cases, clients who'd been paralyzed, brain damaged, orphaned. People at their most vulnerable, desperate for compensation to cover medical bills and lost wages. And Alex, their trusted lawyer, the scion of a legal dynasty, had allegedly been stealing their settlements. The scheme worked like this. Alex would negotiate a settlement with an insurance company. The client would be told the settlement was, say, $1 million. Alex would draft documents, have the client sign, promise the money was coming. But the actual settlement was $3 million. The extra $2 million would be diverted to accounts Alex controlled. Fake structured settlement companies, shell corporations, accounts held by accomplices. Gloria Satterfield's sons were just one example. There were dozens more. A deaf client who'd been injured and was owed a structured settlement. Alex allegedly stole it. A client paralyzed in an accident. Alex allegedly took hundreds of thousands. A family whose son had died. Alex allegedly diverted funds meant for the surviving children. The total, when prosecutors finally added it up, exceeded $8 million stolen from clients. But that wasn't the end of it. Alex had also allegedly stolen from his law firm, fabricating expenses, creating fake cases, pocketing settlement money that should have gone to PMPD. Another million plus there. And where had all this money gone? Investigators discovered that Alex Murdaugh had a secret, devastating addiction to opioid painkillers. He was reportedly spending tens of thousands of dollars per week on pills, buying them illegally, maintaining his habit while maintaining his public persona as a successful lawyer and family man. The money he stole allegedly fed his addiction, covered his lavish lifestyle, and papered over the financial house of cards he'd been building for years. But even with all this theft, Alex was broke by 2021. He'd spent everything. He owed money to drug dealers. He owed money to banks. The boat crash lawsuit threatened to expose his finances, to reveal that despite the family's appearance of wealth, Alex had nothing. He was drowning. And that's when investigators began to theorize about motive. Why would Alex Murdaugh kill his wife and son? The answer, prosecutors would later argue, was coldly pragmatic, distraction and sympathy. In June 2021, Alex knew his financial crimes were about to be exposed. His law firm was auditing accounts. The boat crash lawsuit was proceeding toward a point where Alex's finances would be examined in discovery. He needed time. He needed sympathy. He needed people to stop looking at him as a potential criminal and start seeing him as a victim. What better distraction than the brutal murder of his family? Who would suspect a man whose wife and son had just been slaughtered? Who would aggressively investigate someone experiencing such unimaginable tragedy? It sounds insane, monstrous, unthinkable. But prosecutors would argue that Alex Murdaugh, desperate and cornered, calculated that killing Maggie and Paul would buy him time, sympathy, and cover to continue his schemes or to stage his own death for insurance money. The evidence against Alex began to pile up. The cell phone data was damning. Despite Alex's claims that he hadn't been at the kennels that evening, his phone showed he'd been there. Paul's video captured his voice. Maggie's phone mysteriously stopped all activity around 8:49 p.m., right around the time of death. Then there were the guns. 2 weapons had been used, a shotgun and a rifle. Both belonged to the Murdaugh family. After the murders, those guns were never found. Police theorized Alex had killed his family, disposed of the weapons somewhere on the massive Moselle property or in the surrounding waterways, then drove to his mother's house to create an alibi. His mother, who had dementia, couldn't reliably confirm what time Alex had visited or how long he'd stayed. Convenient. And Alex's phone showed a burst of activity after 9 p.m., dozens of calls and texts, as if he were establishing his location and building a record of normal behavior. But perhaps the most damning evidence was Alex's own behavior in the days and weeks after the murders. While publicly playing the devastated husband and father, Alex was allegedly still stealing money, still scheming, still trying to con people even as his family lay in the morgue. On July 14, 2021, just over a month after the murders, Alex was confronted by his law firm about missing money. He resigned. On September 3rd, he was about to be arrested for financial crimes. On September 4th, he staged his own shooting. On September 6th, he entered rehab. On September 16th, he was arrested. On October 14th, he was charged with stealing from Gloria Satterfield's estate. The charges kept coming. By 2022, Alex Murdaugh faced over 90 criminal counts: fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, drug trafficking, insurance fraud, conspiracy. And looming over all of it, the question of whether he'd killed Maggie and Paul. SLED investigators worked the murder case for over a year, building their evidence meticulously. They brought an FBI analyst to examine the audio from Paul's video. They reconstructed the crime scene. They analyzed blood spatter. They interviewed over 200 witnesses. And they reopened old cases. Stephen Smith's death, Gloria Satterfield's fall, even another suspicious death from 2015. A man named Hakeem Pinkney who died in a car accident after Alex allegedly represented him. Had any of these been murders covered up by Murdaugh power and influence? The Stephen Smith case was particularly troubling. New witnesses came forward claiming they'd been afraid to talk in 2015, but were now willing to say they'd seen Stephen with Buster Murdaugh the night he died. Sandy Smith, Stephen's mother, had always believed the Murdaughs were involved in her son's death. Now, Finally, investigators were taking her seriously. Gloria Satterfield's body was exhumed for autopsy. Her family, who'd only recently learned they'd been cheated out of millions, demanded answers. Had Gloria's death really been an accident? Or had something more sinister happened on those front steps? But the most shocking revelation came from a different direction entirely. In early 2023, as Alex sat in jail awaiting trial for murder, investigators discovered something that would tie together decades of Murdaugh criminality, a connection to drug trafficking. Alex's alleged pill supplier, Curtis Eddie Smith, the same man who D-Bin hired to kill Alex in the fake roadside shooting, began cooperating with authorities. He told investigators that Alex had been buying massive quantities of opioids for years, that the transactions had involved tens of thousands of dollars per week, that Alex had even allegedly used stolen client funds to pay for drugs. But Smith revealed something else. He claimed Alex had asked him for help disposing of evidence after June 7th. Smith wouldn't specify what evidence, but the implication was clear. Had Alex enlisted help in covering up the murders? Smith was charged with drug trafficking and assault for the fake shooting. But prosecutors offered him a deal if he'd testify against Alex. Smith refused. Either out of loyalty, fear, or his own self-preservation, he wouldn't give prosecutors what they needed. Meanwhile, the media frenzy around the case had reached fever pitch. Netflix announced a documentary. HBO planned a series. Podcasts dissected every detail. The Murdaugh name, which had commanded respect and fear in South Carolina for a century, was now synonymous with corruption, greed, and violence. And through it all, Alex Murdaugh maintained his innocence regarding the murders. He admitted to the financial crimes. He'd plead guilty to dozens of fraud charges. He admitted to the fake shooting. He admitted to his drug addiction. But he insisted, through his lawyers, that he hadn't killed Maggie and Paul. Someone else had. He was being framed. He was a victim. On July 14, 2022, over a year after the murders, SLED announced what everyone had been waiting for. Alex Murdaugh was formally charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. The trial was set for January 2023, and South Carolina braced itself for what would be the most sensational criminal trial in the state's history. A trial that would expose a century of corruption, reveal the dark underbelly of Southern legal dynasties, and force a reckoning with how power and privilege can shield evil for generations. Part 3. The Fall of a Dynasty. January 23, 2023. The Culleton County Courthouse in Walterboro, South Carolina. Over 100 journalists, dozens of cameras, and hundreds of spectators crowd into and around the historic building. The trial of Richard Alexander Murdaugh, Alex, for the murders of his wife, Maggie, and son, Paul, is about to begin. It will last 6 weeks, feature over 70 witnesses, and captivate the nation. The prosecution's case, led by South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson and Creighton Waters, is built on circumstantial evidence. No witnesses, no confession, no murder weapons. But they argue the evidence paints a clear picture. Alex Murdaugh, facing financial ruin and criminal exposure, murdered his family to distract attention and buy time. The defense, led by veteran attorneys Dick Harputlian and Jim Griffin, argues that Alex is being railroaded, that SLED investigators focused on him to the exclusion of other suspects, that the real killers, whoever they were, remain free while Alex is scapegoated for his financial crimes. The trial opens with gut-wrenching testimony from the first responders who arrived at Moselle on June 7, 2021. They described the carnage at the dog kennels. Paul's body nearly decapitated by shotgun blasts, Maggie's body riddled with rifle bullets. The crime scene photos shown to the jury are so graphic that several jurors visibly flinch. Then comes the audio, Alex's 911 call. "My wife and son have been shot badly." He sounds panicked, breathless. But prosecutors argue it's a performance, that Alex's behavior immediately after that call was inconsistent with genuine shock and grief. Deputy Laura Rutland, one of the first officers on scene, testifies that Alex seemed more concerned with his phone than with the bodies. That he kept checking it, texting, making calls. That when she tried to comfort him, he seemed detached, mechanical in his responses. But the prosecution's most damaging evidence comes from technology. Paul's cell phone video, filmed at 8:44 p.m., captures 3 voices at the kennels, Paul's, Maggie's, and a third voice identified by multiple witnesses, including Alex's own son, Buster, as Alex's. This is critical because Alex had told investigators repeatedly that he hadn't been at the kennels that evening. He'd been at the house. He'd last seen Paul and Maggie around 8 p.m., and they'd gone down to the kennels without him. He'd stayed at the house, then left to visit his mother. The video proves he lied. Alex was at the kennels at 8:44 p.m., and the medical examiner testified that Maggie and Paul were likely killed between 8:49 and 9 p.m., within minutes of that video. The prosecution walks the jury through Alex's timeline that night, using cell phone data to track his movements. 8:44 p.m., Alex is at the kennels with Paul and Maggie, confirmed by video. 8:49 p.m., all activity on Paul and Maggie's phone stops. Time of death estimated. 9:02 p.m., Alex's phone shows he's driving away from Moselle toward his mother's house. 9:06 p.m., Alex arrives at his mother's house, confirmed by home cameras. 9:22 p.m., Alex leaves his mother's house. Only 16 minutes total. 9:43 p.m., Alex calls 911 from Moselle. Reporting the murders, the prosecution argues that Alex killed Maggie and Paul sometime around 8:50 p.m., then left immediately to establish an alibi at his mother's. The trip to her house, normally 15 minutes, gave him time to dispose of his bloody clothes and the murder weapons. Then he returned to Moselle and discovered the bodies. But where are the guns? The prosecution can't produce them. They theorize Alex threw them in the river or hid them somewhere on the vast Moselle property. But extensive searches turned up nothing. The defense pounces on this. How can you convict a man of murder with no weapons, no blood evidence on him, no witnesses? Alex's clothes were tested, no gunshot residue. His hands were tested, no blood. Where's the physical evidence? The prosecution presents Alex's financial motive. Forensic accountant Ronnie Crosby, Alex's former law partner and friend, testifies that Alex had been stealing for years, that by June 2021, he was facing exposure. The boat crash lawsuit, scheduled for a hearing on June 10th, just 3 days after the murders, was about to reveal Alex's finances. Phone records show that on the day before the murders, June 6th, Alex received calls from his law firm about missing money. He received calls from the boat crash lawyers demanding financial disclosures. The walls were closing in. And then, conveniently, his family is murdered, and suddenly no one's asking about missing money. Everyone's focused on the grieving husband and father. But the most dramatic moment of the trial comes when Alex Murdaugh himself takes the stand in his own defense. It's a high-risk strategy. Prosecutors will have a chance to cross-examine him, to confront him with his years of lies. But the defense argues Alex needs to tell his story, to look the jury in the eye, and proclaim his innocence. For 2 days, Alex testifies. He admits to lying about being at the kennels. He was there, he says, but he left before the murders. He admits to his financial crimes, his drug addiction, his betrayal of his clients and family. He breaks down crying multiple times, describing finding Maggie and Paul's bodies, trying to turn Paul over, seeing the extent of his injuries. I didn't shoot my wife or my son any time, ever, Alex tells the jury, his voice breaking. But on cross-examination, prosecutor Creighton Waters systematically destroys Alex's credibility. Waters confronts Alex with lie after lie. To police, to his law partners, to his family, to his clients. He makes Alex admit he's stolen from vulnerable people, that he's lied under oath in depositions, that he's lied to anyone who trusted him. Isn't it true, Mr. Murdaugh, Waters asks, that over the course of your life, you've been able to lie convincingly when you needed to? Alex admits it's true. And in that moment, the jury sees him for what he is, a liar so practiced, so skilled, that he's deceived everyone around him for decades. Why should they believe him now? Waters argues that Alex killed his family because he loved himself more than he loved them. That when faced with exposure and ruin, he chose to eliminate his wife and son rather than face the consequences of his actions. That Maggie and Paul were obstacles to his survival, so he removed them with cold calculation. The defense argues that the murders make no sense. How would killing Maggie and Paul solve Alex's problems? It only brought more scrutiny, more investigation. The real killers, they suggest, might have been connected to the boat crash, to Paul's upcoming trial, to someone with a grudge against the Murdaugh family. But the prosecution has an answer. Alex didn't think the murders would solve his problems forever. He just needed time. Time to stage his own death for insurance money. Time to flee. Time to concoct a plan. He didn't need a perfect solution. He needed a temporary distraction. And murdering his family gave him that. After 6 weeks of testimony, the case goes to the jury on March 2nd, 2023. They deliberate for less than 3 hours. Guilty. On both counts of murder. On both counts of weapon possession. Alex Murdaugh shows no emotion as the verdicts are read. The courtroom explodes in whispers and gasps. Outside, crowds cheer. Maggie's family weeps. Paul's friends embrace. Judge Clifton Newman sentences Alex immediately. 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He'll die in prison. In his sentencing statement, Judge Newman addresses Alex directly. Over the past century, your family, including you, have been prosecuting people here in this courtroom, and many have received the death penalty, probably for lesser conduct. It's especially heartbreaking for me to see you go in the media from being a grieving father who lost the wife and son to being the person indicted and convicted of killing them. Alex is taken away in handcuffs. The Murdaugh Dynasty, 3 generations of prosecutorial power, a century of legal dominance, ends in disgrace and prison. But the case doesn't end there. In November 2023, Alex is convicted of 19 additional financial crimes and sentenced to another 27 years in federal prison. He's ordered to pay back millions to his victims, though he has no money left. In 2024, Alex pleads guilty to all remaining state financial charges, over 80 counts total. He admits to stealing from clients, from his law firm, from Gloria Satterfield's family. He apologizes, crying on camera, claiming he wants to take responsibility. But victims and their families see it as another performance, another manipulation. The Stephen Smith case remains under active investigation. In 2023, his body was exhumed and a new autopsy was performed. Results are still pending, but his mother, Sandy, finally has hope that her son's death will be properly investigated and those responsible will be held accountable. Gloria Satterfield's death remains classified as accidental, but her family is pursuing civil action against Alex for the theft of their settlement money. They've received some compensation through recovered funds, but the full amount remains unrecovered. The boat crash that killed Mallory Beach, the incident that began unraveling the Murdaugh web, resulted in the closure of several lawsuits. Mallory's family reached settlements with the convenience store that sold Paul alcohol and with Alex's estate. Paul, of course, never faced trial. He was murdered before justice could be served. The Murdaugh law firm, PMPD, continues to operate but has rebranded and distanced itself from the Murdaugh name. Many of Alex's former partners have testified against him, their decades-long friendships destroyed by his betrayals. And Moselle, the hunting estate where Maggie and Paul died, has been sold. The new owners reportedly plan to demolish the kennels where the murders occurred and renovate the property completely, erasing the physical reminders of that June night. But what the Murdaugh case exposed can't be erased. It revealed how a century of power and privilege can corrupt absolutely, how legal dynasties can operate above the law for generations, how wealth and influence can cover up crimes, protect the guilty, and victimize the vulnerable. For 100 years, the Murdaughs told the people of South Carolina's Lowcountry, "Trust us, we're here to protect you. We represent justice." And for 100 years, at least for the last generation, they were lying. They were stealing, possibly killing, and using their power not to serve justice, but to shield themselves from it. Alex Murdaugh is now inmate number 119091 at a South Carolina maximum security prison. He's 65 years old. He will never be free again. He'll never practice law. He'll never rebuild the family name. The Murdaugh dynasty is finished. But the victims, Maggie, Paul, Mallory Beach, Stephen Smith, Gloria Satterfield, and the dozens of clients Alex stole from, they're gone or scarred forever. No verdict, no sentence, no amount of prison time can restore what was taken from them. And that's perhaps the cruelest irony of the Murdaugh case. A family that spent a century prosecuting justice, defining justice, controlling justice in their corner of South Carolina, ended up proving that justice is often incomplete, delayed, and insufficient. Alex will die in prison, yes, but will justice ever truly be served? Can it be, when so much was stolen, so many were hurt, so many questions remain unanswered? The Murdaugh case reminds us that power, unchecked and unquestioned for too long, inevitably corrupts. That legal dynasties, political connections, and family wealth can shield monsters for generations. That the people who claim to represent justice are sometimes the ones perverting it most. And it reminds us that eventually, not always, but sometimes, the truth comes out. Lies unravel, power fails, and the mighty fall. It took 100 years, but the Murdaugh dynasty finally collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Justice, delayed and imperfect as it is, caught up. If this story shook you, if it made you question how many other families like the Murdaughs are operating right now in positions of power, hiding their crimes behind badges and gavels and family names, then you understand why we tell these stories. Not for entertainment, but for awareness. Not to glorify evil, but to expose it. This channel exists to shine light into the darkest corners of the justice system, to tell the stories that need to be told. To make sure that victims like Maggie, Paul, Mallory, Stephen, and Gloria are remembered not as statistics, but as human beings who deserved better. If you want more stories like this, stories that expose corruption, demand accountability, and honor the victims, then make sure you're subscribed. Because the Murdaugh case is just one of many. The darkness runs deeper than you think, and someone needs to keep shining the light. The question is, are you ready to see what we find next?